Section 14.2, the axial and appendicular skeleton, structure of axial skeleton. The axial skeleton comprises the vertebral column, the skull, and the rib cage. The axial skeleton is the upright axis of the body and protects the brain, spinal cord, heart, and lungs. Most of the major centers of our physiology. Components of the vertebral column. The vertebral column has 26 bones divided into 5 regions. Okay, first is your cervical region with 7 vertebrae labeled C1 to C7 and curved anteriorly. Second region is your thoracic region with 12 vertebrae labeled T1 to T12 and curved posteriorly. Third is your lumbar region with 5 vertebrae labeled L1 to L5 and curved anteriorly. Fourth is your sacral region with 1 bone curved posteriorly. And fifth is your coccyx, your tailbone, with 1 bone curved posteriorly. Okay, the spinal cord lies protected in the vertebral canal. The spinal nerves leave the spinal cord through the intervertebral foramina to travel to other parts of the body. Intervertebral discs consist of fibrocartilage and inhabit the intervertebral space between the bodies of adjacent vertebrae. They provide additional support and cushioning for the vertebral column. The center of the disc is a gelatinous nucleus pulposus. So cervical is pertaining to the neck region, coccyx, small tailbone at the lowest end of the vertebral column. Let's see, disc, flattened round structure in the skeletal system of flattened round fibrocartilaginous structure between bones. Foramen is an aperture and opening through a structure. Foramina is plural for foramen. Intervertebral is located between 2 vertebrae. Lumbar, Latin for loin, relating to the region in the back and sides between the ribs and pelvis. Sacrum, segment of the vertebral column that forms part of the pelvis. Sacral, pertaining to the sacrum. Your spine is a vertebral column or a short projection from a bone. And spinal is adjective, pertaining to the spine. Thorax, Greek for breastplate, the part of the trunk between the abdomen and the neck. Thoracic, pertaining to the chest, your thorax. Vertebra, one of the bones of the spinal column. Vertebrae, pertaining to the vertebrae is plural for vertebra. Vertebral is pertaining to the vertebrae. It's the adjective. Okay, the skull. Ooh, cool picture. The human skull has 22 bones, 8 of which make up the cranium. The upper part of the skull that encloses the cranial cavity and protects the brain. The bones of the cranium are your frontal bone, forms the forehead and roofs of the orbits, and contains a pair of right and left frontal sinuses above the orbits. 2, your parietal bones. 2, forming the bulging sides and roof of the cranium. 3, your occipital bone forms the back of and part of the base of the cranium. This is a really cool picture. 4, your temporal bones. 2, form the sides and part of the base of the cranium. 5 is your sphenoid bone. forms part of the base of the cranium and orbits. And 6 is your ethmoid bone, forms part of the nose and the orbits and is hollow, forming the ethmoid sinuses. Dope. Hold on, let me see. Hopefully you see that. That's cool. You massage along these lines too. It feels really good. Okay. Okay, the bones of the cranium are joined together by sutures, joints that appear as seams covered on the inside and outside by a thin layer of connective tissue. The bones of the cranium are joined to, I just said that. The lower anterior part of the skull comprises the 14 bones of the facial skeleton. Interesting. Maxillary bones, 2, form the upper jaw, hold the upper teeth, and are hollow, forming the maxillary sinuses. Palatine bones are located behind the maxilla, 2 of them. Zygomatic bones form the prominences of the cheeks below the eyes. Lacrimal bones form the medial wall of each eye orbit. Nasal bones form the sides and bridge of the nose. Vomer bone separates the 2 nasal cavities. Inferior nasal concha, I'm not sure, conchi, are fragile bones in the lower nasal cavity, and your mandible is the lower jawbone, which holds the lower teeth. Cool. The third component of the axial skeleton is the rib cage. All right, bones and joints of mastication. The temporomandibular joint, TMJ, connects the condyle of the mandible to a fossa in the temporal bone at the base of the skull. The joint acts as a hinge when you open and close your mouth. Concha, it's a shell-shaped bone on the medial wall of nasal cavity. Conchi is plural for concha. Cranium, the upper part of the skull that encloses and protects the brain pertaining to the skull. Cranial, pertaining to the skull. Ethmoid bone that forms the back of the nose and part of the orbits and encloses numerous air cells forming the ethmoid sinuses. Lacrimal means tears. Ethmoid. Let's go back. Ethmoid bone that forms the back of the nose and part of the orbits encloses numerous air cells forming ethmoid sinuses. Okay, so ethm, the root is ethm, meaning sieve, sieve. Lacrim is tears, so pertaining to tears. Mandible, lower jawbone. Mandibular, pertaining to the mandible. Mandible, the jaw. Maxilla, your upper jawbone containing right and left maxillary sinuses. Occiput, the back of the skull. Occipital bone, because occiput means back of head. So bone that forms the back and part of the base of the cranium. Palatine, Latin for palate, bone that forms the hard palate and parts of the nose and orbits. Parietal bone, so pariet means wall. Bones that form the bulging sides and roof of the cranium. Let's see, whatever. Sphenoid bone. Pause this for a second. Alright, sphenoid bone. Sphen is wedge. A wedge-shaped bone that forms part of the base of the cranium and the orbits. temporal bones, bones that form the sides and part of the base of the cranium. We have temporomandibular joints, the joint between the temporal bone and the mandible. And vomer, Latin for plowshare, meaning lower nasal septum. Zygoma is French for yolk, bone that forms the prominence of the cheek. Zygomatic, adjective. Zygomat means cheekbone. There's a lot of new root words in this one. Appendicular skeleton, shoulder girdle and upper arm. The pectoral shoulder girdle connects the axial skeleton to the upper limbs and helps with movements of the upper limb. The bones of the pectoral girdle are the scapula, shoulder blades, or scapulae, and clavicles. Clavicle bones.